Well, Razorback fans, we know spring football is still going on. We're going to give you some updates because there's some interesting things dealing with the wide receivers for the Razorbacks, as well as getting some basketball and baseball updates, all on today's episode of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Nabors. I am also the host of Out of Bounds. You can catch every weekday afternoon from 1 to 4 on 103.7 The Buzz and 103.7thebuzz.com. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. I hope everybody's having a wonderful Friday as you have finally made it to the weekend. And we know that there's always going to be a lot of fun stuff going on in the weekends where the weather starts getting warmer, which is not really that great right now, but still getting warmer. And we're going to get closer and closer, I guess, to next week, which I know is going to be a huge weekend for Razorback football for the spring game, and I guess baseball for a home series against Tennessee. But I had somebody comment the other day, because let's be honest, there's so many things going on there. Like, they want to hear about football, and there's some people that want to hear about baseball. And it's like, hey, I'm trying to cover it all, my best of my ability. But still, I was just thinking about with some basketball, which we'll talk about all three today and try to cover it all, because it has gone a little bit quiet on the basketball side of things. But for football and spring football, I had a chance yesterday to watch I guess you want to call it a press conference. It's a Zoom conference with a few of the players for Arkansas, and in particular case, some new wide receivers, with Armstrong as well as Isaac Tesla, who, if you remember, was on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast a couple months ago. He was really great. But just hearing about some of the things that they had to say, and just listening to not only the type of things that they are going through and what they were trying to expect and trying to get ready and going into spring, I think was really fascinating. But something stood out to me, really, about them two in particular, where they talked about how tough it was when they first got into the spring program. And I think even Armstrong said, he's like, man, I got to do 3 months more of this. It's going to be, he's like going to be tough, but he says because of the culture and because of the family atmosphere and because of the great coaches and players lifting them up, he was able to really go through it too. And one of the things that I guess when I look at both of those players, and there's been other players like this that have really shown out in a really great way, and maybe not necessarily just on the field, but just in a mentality standpoint. Now, I'm not saying this to try to compare or try to say that one is better than the other or anything like that. I'm not trying to say that at all. But there is something to be said about transfers that come in from smaller schools, from smaller circumstances, from just a place to where nobody even knew who they were in the grand scheme of things when it came to college football. And kind of with Isaac Tesla and Armstrong, who came from, Texas A&M Commerce, and, you have Isaac Tesla, who came from, the Michigan and area, it just never went to any sort of big-time school, to now at this point in time, they're at a big-time school. They're at an SEC program. And when we talked to Isaac about it, he kind of alluded to it as well, and I think that we're going to start seeing a theme, is that if you think about a player who comes from a circumstance like that, they weren't on TV every day. They weren't having the best weight room facilities. They weren't having sold-out crowds. There was a lot of things that they had to go through and a lot of things they dealt with that were not near to the level of what a place like Arkansas provides. And yet here they are. So how do they handle that? Because a lot of people are going to look at it and say, well, how could they possibly be any sort of great player whenever they're coming from such a small school? You're telling me they're ready for the SEC? This is as close to the NFL as it's going to get. How are they just going to go from playing in those leagues and D3s and all that to suddenly being able to compete in the SEC? It's kind of that mentality that some of you and some people may actually have. But the way I look at it is, you think about the work ethic that it takes and the concentration and the ability to look at this as an opportunity that you didn't have before and to not let it go to waste. And the amount of effort and the amount of time and energy that you're going to put into building your own skill set and improving your own game, because you know that this is your chance. This is something you've never had before. And now you have it, and now you want to make the most of it. I love those players. I love the players that are like that. And sometimes I can even get a little bit this way too, where if you see a transfer, and this is for any sport too, mind you, but if it's for football or basketball or baseball, if you get a transfer from some small school, it's like, who cares? What big whoop? What have they done? Or how are they going to compete? Like, sometimes that happens. But when you get the guys that just want to work so hard and to make the most out of these opportunities, that's when you're going to find those great players that are going to stand out in the best of ways. And not only just be highly talented guys, but guys that are going to be great for the culture and great for a locker room and great for just going out there and giving it their all. And again, this is nothing against the scholarship guys that were, highly recruited or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. But that's where I can tell by these guys in the way that they're talking that this is a gold mine for them. This is an opportunity like they never would have dreamed about just a few years ago. And here they are in this situation, being able to play big-time college football. Now, I think about guys like, not only and since we talk about football, but even in basketball, I think a guy like a Jalen Tate. And, he was a guy from, I think it was Northern Kentucky. I never really heard of it, but he came in and what he was able to do and how he was able to accomplish it. You think about guys in previous years that really developed and showed out, and whether it was JUCO guys or guys that maybe didn't have all the opportunities, once they got on campus and once they started putting it together, they started being great. And so that's why I'm really excited about these wide receivers, because that's essentially what all you have. You have a group that is completely brand new for the most part. And for the third straight year, essentially, you're having to completely and totally rejuvenate the wide receiver room. Last year, you had Matt Landers and Hazelwood, who were your two big production guys, who were really good wide receivers, and you have a few other pieces here and there, and then they're gone. Even the year before that, you had Traylon Burks, who was everything, who was the guy, and he needed to be the guy. But once he left and some of the other seniors left, you had to adjust. And so this is where it's going to be very fascinating, to where you kind of had it in different rooms. Like when you had Traylon Burks, it didn't matter who was around him in the wide receiver group. You had Burks. That dude you just find a way to get him the ball, and he's going to make it happen. He's going to be great. So you had that. You just had a first-round pick, next-level athlete that comes around like once every 10 years or so at Arkansas, and you didn't really need anybody else. So that was how you played the wide receiver. And then this past year, you played it by getting a bunch of big-time transfers, guys that were coming in from Jaden Hazelwood coming from Oklahoma, or Matt Landers coming, I know he came from Toledo, but was at Georgia before, highly sought-after guys. You went through those big-time transfer routes, those big-time players, and brought them in. And now you're doing it to where you have some guys that you developed that got a little bit of playing time here and there last year, but then you have essentially 3 fresh guys that weren't even at a Power 5 school and really never thought about maybe even being at a Power 5 school before, and then here they are. So it's a whole new element. And then with the new offense with Dan Enos, and knowing how Sam Pittman's talked about the development that the offense is going to take, and how it's changed and what it looks like and everything, it is going to be a little bit of nerve-wracking. Like it is. But I continue to try to go back, and when I'm looking at this offense and see what the wide receiver group can do, I think about when Dan Enos was the offensive coordinator in 2015, and he had Brandon Allen throw for over 3,000 yards. The same with Austin Allen the next year. Like 2 great back-to-back performances by those quarterbacks. Who did he throw to? Who were those guys throwing to? They had some really good tight ends, for sure. But the wide receivers, it's like you had a Keon Hatcher, you had a Drew Morgan, you had a Dominique Reed. Those guys were solid, but in any other circumstances, they probably would have been viewed the same way that maybe these guys are being viewed. It's like, okay, well, what has he done? What has he done? Why is he good? What's he going to be able to add? Well, they made it work in that offense by utilizing the strengths. And I think with what Dan Enos is going to provide and what Sam Pittman is trying to provide for this offense to make it work is you're going to see something similar. I think these wide receivers are going to step up because not only are they big physical guys, but they have a work ethic and a mentality that's going to be that dog in them, if you will, to where they want to make the most out of it because they know that this is an opportunity of a lifetime. And I think because of the fact you have KJ Jefferson, who is such a skilled quarterback, who is an athlete beyond measure, and, I think he could have a huge jump this season. Because of all those facts, I think that the wide receivers are going to step up and have a huge year to help KJ Jefferson have the best year that he's ever had at Arkansas. I believe that. Now, it's easy to say it. It's easy to predict it right now in the early parts of April. Like it's easy to do all of that. But if I'm looking at it from that perspective, I believe that that's the type of things that you're going to have and have to do in order to be better as an offense next year. I like the wide receiver room, and I like the Dan Enos hire, and I like KJ Jefferson, and I just believe with all those things coming together, you're going to see a more improved passing game. Now, I know that there's a lot of other elements we could sit here and we could break down and talk about defense and other parts of the offense, and even special teams and everything. Like, I know, we could spend podcast after podcast after podcast talking about all those things. But I wanted to talk about the wide receiver since we got a chance to talk to him or at least hear from him yesterday. And the worrisome part of it where if I ask you what part of the offense, because I know defense has got his own stuff, but if I ask you what part of the offense are you most concerned about, I think every one of you would say a wide receiver. Quarterback's good. You're good. Great there. Running back's great. You're great there. Offensive line, yeah, but you're always going to be solid there. With Sam Pittman and Cody Kennedy, you're going to be solid there. And tight ends, I think you've improved from last year. You had Trey Knox, who was fine, but I think you're already better at tight end this year than you were last year as a collective group. So what is it? It's wide receiver. I predict a big year for the wide receivers. I like what I'm seeing from the wide receivers. I like what I'm hearing from the wide receivers. But I just love the mentality more so than anything, and I feel like that's probably what this team needed more so than anything, is get people who in there who want to work, who want to grind, and want to buy in, because they know that this is their chance to take that next step. And hopefully for them and their sake, make it to the next step when it comes to everything in the NFL. We'll talk a little bit about basketball on the other side of the break. But first, I got to tell you about the NBA playoffs. They're almost here. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use. And they can bet on everything from, what are you talking about, money lines? You're talking about parlays? You're talking about point scores, threes drain. Everything they have available for you. And with that no-sweat first bet, you don't want to miss your chance and your opportunity to go to that next level. $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so continuing on with the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, looking at Eric Musselman and the basketball team. It's kind of gone quiet, at least for the most part. We know that there's going to be some visitors this weekend and this week that Muss is really wanting to talk to, and I'm sure the Arkansas fans are pretty excited to hear from and know if they're going to be a part of it. But it's interesting right now, and it's interesting how you have Eric Musselman, who is a tactician, maniacal genius, and his roster management has always been something that he has really, really been able to hold his hat on. You have all of that, and you know all of that. We all know all of that. But when you're looking at some of the moves as far as who's coming back and the approach that he's taking, I'm not saying it's unorthodox or I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying anything like that, but it's a little bit different. Like, he's always been so guard heavy. And going into the portal to get guards, which I know that they will. They will end up getting some. But you're looking at the bigs. Like last year, you had Jalen Williams, and that was pretty much it as your bigs. And Musselman made a point to go into the portal and get size, get dudes, get big dudes that can come in and help out. And he did. He had Trevin Brazil, the Mitchell twins. You had Jalen Graham. You still had Kamani Johnson on the team. I mean, you're talking about 5 guys right there that are bigs, and most of them being 6'9", 6'10", or above. Like, he went into the portal to do that. Now, this year, we all know what happened, but I was going to be curious to see if he would take that same approach again this year in the portal. Well, he already got Brazil coming back, and he has Jalen Graham coming back. Okay. And he's still talking to some other bigs, too. We know about the whole Hunter Dickinson situation. Wouldn't that be something? But we don't know about the Mitchell twins yet, as far as what they're going to end up doing. But it's just fascinating to me, where I figured that it would be pretty clear cut and dry right out of the gate. As far as, all right, you're going and you're staying and you're doing this and you're doing that. Because on top of all that, with Joseph Pinion announcing via social media, I guess he's coming back, and then like Darian Ford's been reported. It's like he's been saying he's coming back, and Barry Dunning, like all 3 of those freshmen. It's like, wait, hold on. I know like the roster's going to start getting full. And Anthony Black's going to announce that he's going to be moving on and going to the NBA. So it's like, who's going to be, somebody's got to leave. There's got to be some scholarships opening up. And when those things start to happen, though, it makes me a little bit uneasy, because like, well, that may mean that Devo may stay and may go on. That might be what ends up happening, which I don't really want to happen. I don't think anybody wants that to happen, but it's still a weird thing. So I don't know what's going on and how he's going about it, but that's okay. Like, I don't need to know. He's going about it the way that he wants to and keeping it very close to the chest and everything. I'm fine with that. Like, so I just want the end result. What is it going to look like by then? What's it going to look like when everything gets put in together and they have a plan set in stone and they're going to take those next steps? What is that going to look like? But the idea of Muss and how he goes about his portal ways is a lot of it's like smoke and mirrors. But when it comes to having guys coming back in retention, it's not really been his thing, or hasn't really been a thing for Arkansas. And this year it's looking like not only are you getting some of the key players back, but could be even getting the guys that didn't play at all back. So is that what Muss is wanting? Is Muss wanting to have more retention? Is he wanting to have continuity from the last season to this season? Maybe so. Maybe he sees that. Maybe he feels like, you know what, I can't deal with this changing of roster, at least at the high level clip that he's had to deal with anymore. If you think about just from like the 2 years ago to last year, you had 2 guys returning on the team. 2. It was Devo and Kamani. And that was it. And I feel like that's probably a tough thing to do. It's not impossible to work with, because we know it worked out all right going to the Sweet 16. But it's really difficult, I'm sure, to work with. So maybe this is Muss going about and saying, you know what? I'll go into the portal and get the key contributors, but I want the guys also on the bench, or guys that are at least in the program that I like what they bring in practices and I like what they bring energy-wise. I want them still on the team. I don't want to lose them. We need to build the continuity. We need to have it a little bit more. Maybe that's the case. But he is a maniacal dude, and I know everybody loves him, and I do too. Like, I love Muss. It's just I feel like trying to tap into his mindset is almost like dadgum near impossible. Like, there's no way you can even try to rationalize the things that he's thinking about or what he's even like making sense on. That's why I'm just sitting here just laughing about it and talking about it, but also baffled a little bit about it, just trying to make sense of it all. But man, that's I love talking about it though, and I can't wait to see who he brings in, because I'm sure that I will be completely rational and not have high expectations whatsoever. Still 100 Dickinson. That'd be pretty cool. But again, that's a pretty tall order to fill. We'll talk a little bit about baseball and some issues down there in Oxford here on the other side of the break. So stay with us here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so final segment here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. The Razorback Baseball team was supposed to play last night, in Oxford to start their first 3-game series, and it didn't happen because of the rain and the cold and everything. Game didn't even get started, so they moved it to a doubleheader, which will be happening today. But what was funny is Phil Elson, the voice of the Razorback baseball team, tweeted this out because he's there, of course, going to be calling the game. He says, there appears to be a massive power outage on campus at Ole Miss, which is affecting Swayze Field for the time being. Adds a wrinkle into today's planned 2 o'clock doubleheader. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow. Okay. So you're telling me that Oxford, Mississippi, baseball capital of the world, at least the champions this past year, power outages are having impacts on the stadium itself. Like, I don't know what it is, but I feel like they find ways to not play games in the weirdest fashion. I feel like Ole Miss does. And again, maybe it's more common in baseball than what I even realized, but that's how I've always just felt about it. It's like they always have, the sod wasn't up to par, so we had to call the game. Like, I guess Southern Miss, I think is who they played. It's like, sod. Did the bats work? Like, does the ball still throw? Like, you can still play? And then they've had, stuff like last night. I don't know if they could have played or not played, but there was certainly some belief that they could have done it because they called the game 30 minutes before the first pitch. So it wasn't like if they would have had it like, hey, we're taking extra precautions, we'll wait. But like 30 minutes before the game, you're just like, nah. Like, what changed from 30 minutes before the first pitch to a few hours before first pitch? What changed? And then you got power outages, which I assume they're going to get restored. I assume they're going to have the games today, but how does this happen? Like, you're supposed to be an SEC town, and you're over here having power outage issues that may keep you from having a baseball game. Would never happen. Never happen at Baum, ever. Of course not. But hopefully the games get played, and I'm sure we'll have to recap it and talk about it on Monday when we do the podcast then. But still, it's I don't even know what to make of it. Oxford sucks. Still pissing me off, though, they have a championship. Ugh. Moving on from that, though. We got to have a great weekend, right? We're going to have a great weekend. It's going to be awesome because a lot of things are going to be going on, and I know the Masters, of course, is happening, which I'm a huge fan of, too. So it's going to be a good one, and hopefully on Monday we have some more news with basketball, which I'm just going off of trends. We probably will. Hopefully we're talking about an Ole Miss series victor, an Arkansas series victory over Ole Miss, I should say. And, diving into that and still have some spring football practice updates and everything, too. So it's going to be a great weekend, folks. It's going to be a great weekend. I'm looking forward to it. Appreciate all of you that listen in to the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on Google Play. You can also get after me on Twitter at BuzzJohnNabors for any questions, comments, concerns that you may have. We'll keep it going from there. Same podcast time, same podcast channel tomorrow afternoon, or I should say Monday afternoon. Have a great one, everybody. We'll see you then.